Good morning. Today I'm going to be discussing my modified Vostok Amphibia 090659 SE crown upgrade. I decided to upgrade the standard crown you're looking at here to the SE Special Edition crown. So firstly I'll talk you through the merits of the Vostok Amphibia crown, and then I'll discuss the movement, and I'll also talk you through how to change the crown and also the tools I use to do the job. So with regards to the crown, this is the solid stainless steel crown used in Vostok Amphibia. It's made from 316L grade stainless steel, and if you look at the end you can see it's unsigned, and one can see the lathe tool tip concentric tool marks. So aesthetically pleasing, and it is durable and functional. Early versions of the Amphibia crown were made from solid brass, which was nickel plated to give the impression of being silver and stainless steel. The problem with using nickel plated brass is that early versions of the Amphibia used a manual wind movement rather than automatic, so that meant that the watch required daily manual winding. And so when one manually wound the crown daily, the problem is the nickel plating wore off the brass crown, and therefore it showed through so as a gold colour, and that was a problem because then the nickel plating eventually flaked off the brass crown. So Vostok used brass crowns from 1965, when the Amphibia was first created, through till the 2000s, and it's only relatively recently, in the late 2000s, they switched over to using these solid stainless steel crowns, which are a notable improvement. So I prefer the stainless steel coin edge finish crown to the earlier versions, which are brass and nickel plated, and they do have the same appearance because they have the same coin edge finishing. Although the brass crowns had a dome cap to them which was mirror polished. That was the finish, rather than this lathe tool tip concentric machine finishing. Now in all cases, both the brass crowns and the stainless steel crowns had a clutch mechanism, so as you can see the crown floats on the winding stem. Usually with dive watches, the crown is screwed with a thread onto the winding stem permanently and secured with Loctite, and that means that the thread lock or Loctite prevents the crown unscrewing from the winding stem when one unscrews or pulls out the crown to set the time or the date complication, or to manually wind it. So it's effective. Screwing on the stainless steel crown onto a winding stem does work, but I like the design of the Amphibia crown, which is unique because it has a clutch mechanism internally. So if you look at the underside, you'll see it has a flat rubber washer as an alternative to using a rubber O-ring, and the flat rubber washer, which is like a gasket, provides an effective hermetic seal to 200 meters of water resistance. So it's a very clever design because behind that flat rubber washer houses a clutch mechanism, and as you can see, the crown is permanently free to articulate. It can move up and down, engage and disengage from the winding stem. The purpose of having a clutch mechanism in the crown and the crown disengaging is to protect the movement and the winding stem from shock damage. The tonneau case of the Amphibia means there's no crown guards. It predates the use of crown guards. It was originally made in 1965. So in the absence of crown guards, what Vostok did as an alternative is they put a clutch mechanism inside the crown, and that means if the crown was impacted, the shock damage to the crown wouldn't be transmitted from the crown down the winding stem into the centre of the movement, and therefore damaging the movement. The clutch itself absorbs the shock, and that means that the shock doesn't travel down the winding stem inside the movement. So very clever design. So I'll show you the SE crown in comparison and you'll see the difference. Now usually I buy my Vostok parts from Meranom.com in Russia. Meranom is an authorised dealer for Vostok parts. Vostok parts are made in Chistopol in Russia. They directly supply Meranom.com in Russia, and then he ships globally. But unfortunately this SE crown for the 090 case was out of stock on Meranom.com, so I used an alternative supplier, and the eBay seller is called Ferrari Wins Again, and I want to give special credit to Noel, Ferrari Wins Again, because of his outstanding customer service. Now he's based in the UK, and the advantage of that is the crown was shipped to me in only 3 working days from the UK. Normally if one buys the parts from Meranom.com in Russia, it takes 4 weeks typically, so a much longer delivery time. So I highly recommend Ferrari Wins Again on eBay for sourcing Vostok parts from the UK. So this is the 090 solid stainless steel crown. As you can see, it has a mirror polished finish to the cap of the crown. It's engraved beautifully with a signed B for the Vostok logo. In Russian Cyrillic, Vostok is spelt B-O-C-T-O-K, and Vostok in Russian means east. So coinage finish, similar to the standard crown but lower profile. It doesn't project as much from the flank of the tonneau case, and I also like the fact it has a machined bevel on the edge of the crown, and that means that the coinage finishing to the knurling doesn't have any sharp points on the edge, so it's a more pleasant crown to operate with index finger and thumb because the teeth of the knurling on the coinage finishing don't dig into the skin. So it's a pleasant crown to look at, but also it feels better, aesthetically pleasing. The coinage finishing is done to a higher standard, and I just think it finishes the piece to perfection, having a signed crown rather than an unsigned crown. So I'll talk you through the tools I use. Now, the first thing I'm going to recommend if you're working on a watch or a movement is to wear either latex finger cots that watchmakers wear, or alternatively a pair of latex gloves as I'm doing, and that prevents contaminating the movement with any dust, and also it prevents smudging the bridges of the movement or the rotor with fingerprints, or the inside of a crystal, for example, with fingerprints. So it's a very good idea to wear latex gloves or finger cots. Now, one thing I recommend doing is using a nylon plastic watch case holding tool like this. These are inexpensive to buy on AliExpress, eBay, or alternatively Amazon. They also sometimes come as part of a watchmaking toolkit. I purchased this one on eBay and I've used it on a number of watches: Seiko SKX 007s, Seiko Turtles, the SRP 773. I've also used it on Steinhardt Ocean 1s, the 39mm and 42 respectively, and this Vostok Amphibia you're looking at here. Now, what I like about this style of watch case holding tool is it has 4 metal spigots which are coated in nylon, and one can move the spigots around in the holes in the body of the case holding tool to get the perfect positioning for different size cases. I've used this on 39mm Ocean 1s. This is a 40mm tonneau case, and I've even used it on a 42mm Steinhardt Ocean 1, so it will grip all sizes of watch case. Now, on the underside I use 4 dots of blue tack, and the purpose of that is it sticks the case holder tool down to the desktop so it doesn't slide around. So that's something else I'm going to recommend. Use blue tack to secure the watch case tool down to the desk. You'll have seen this before. I also use 4 dots of white tack on the base for the same purpose, to stick it down to the desk. This nylon plastic block is a watch bracelet block. It has different size slots for different size watch bracelet thicknesses. I use this to secure the watch bracelet and stick it down to the desk so that I can unscrew the 1.6mm screw pins and have 2 hands free rather than 1 hand free. So that means I can guide the tip of the screwdriver onto the screw head with 2 hands, and I highly recommend you buy one of these. They're available on AliExpress, Amazon and eBay. Inexpensive, very useful. Now, to remove the case back, I use one of these case back tools, and this is the least expensive case back tool money can buy. I bought this one as part of a toolkit on Amazon, and although it's inexpensive, it is one of the best case back tools I've used because of the length of the pins. Often the problem with case back tools is the pins are too short, and that means there's not enough clearance between the body of the case back tool and the bubble case back itself. On dive watches, often they have a bubble shaped case back, alternatively an exhibition case back, and therefore minimal clearance between the case back and the body of the tool, so one scuffs the case back with the tool. And I think that this is actually one of the better designs. Nice flat handle which gives good purchase when one grips it, comfortable to use. It's got a knurled nut which one can unscrew with one's index finger and thumb to get the positioning of the sliding pin correct, to get the perfect distance between the 2 pins on the slots engaged on the case back. So very inexpensive to buy, but actually one of the best case back tools I've used. I've tried different designs and I actually prefer this. I've used this on a number of watches without any problems. I highly recommend this design. Another thing I like to use is this stainless steel tweezers. This is made by Vitus and it's the ST16. It came as part of a watchmaking toolkit from Amazon. The needle point tweezers are precision ground to a tip, as you can see, and very effective for picking up small screws from movements and also small watch parts. Now, in this case, I've used it to grip the crown winding stem to insert it into the movement when refitting the crown to the movement. So I highly recommend you purchase a needle point set of tweezers like these made from stainless steel. You'll have seen this before. This is my personal favourite professional watchmaking screwdriver. This is made by Horitech in Switzerland, and it's hollow ground. It's a 1.6mm, but the tip is hollow ground rather than being flat bladed like the Bergen 1.6mm, which is the other popular choice. Just bear with me and I'll get the camera to focus. There we are. So as you can see, it has a curved profile to the tip rather than being flat bladed like a Bergen, and I actually find the curved hollow ground profile to this Horitech screwdriver grips Rolex Oyster bracelet screws better, and it also grips the screw heads of my Strapcode Super O Boya 1.6mm screw heads better than the flat bladed Bergen. So highly recommend this Horitech 1.6mm. Another thing I use is this 1mm pin. It's made from steel, which is nickel plated to look like stainless steel, knurled body to the shank, and the 1mm pin is the perfect size for pressing down the crown release lock to release the crown winding stem from the movement, and I'll show you how to do that. Lastly, I also use this wooden toothpick. It's useful for moving the rotor out of the way, and I often use wooden toothpicks to move watch parts around. Works better than a steel screwdriver, which could potentially scratch the bridges of the movement or the rotor if one slips. And lastly, I use this, which is a rubber blower. These are inexpensive to buy on eBay, AliExpress or Amazon. I bought this one from eBay. It's rubber with a steel tip, and it's useful for blowing out dust particles from the inside of a watch case or crystal, or blowing dust off the movement before reassembling the watch. So I highly recommend this if you're going to be working on a watch movement or replacing a watch crystal. So let's look closer at the movement. I'll just zoom in and give you a better look, and then I'll explain how you remove the crown and winding stem from the movement. Firstly, I'll talk about the movement used in this Vostok Amphibia, which is one of my personal favourite watch movements. This is the caliber 2415. The date complication version of this movement is called the 2415B. The B indicates it has a date complication. So there's been some notable upgrades to this. This uses a solid stainless steel rotor which has stripes milled onto the rotor, as you can see, and then it's anodized into this gunmetal finish, so very aesthetically pleasing. It looks rather like Geneva stripes, the Côtes du Genève used on Swiss-made movements. Now, earlier versions of the 2415 had a brushed satin finish to the rotor, and then the B for Vostok was milled out of the rotor, so it looked partially skeletonized. I actually prefer these stripes milled into the stainless steel rotor. So as you can see, the bridges to the movement are undecorated. They don't have any pelage finishing, but however they do have this concentric finishing of lathe tool tip finishing, which does add interest to the bridges. It's engraved with RUS for Russia, and also 2415 on the bridge, as you can see, for the caliber 2415. So it's a 31 dual movement. Now, early versions of the Amphibia used a 18 dual movement, which was the caliber 2209. That was a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement, although not as efficient, and it did have a long service interval of 10 years, which this also shares. But however, the disadvantage of the movement was it was manually wound. It didn't have a rotor. So not being an automatic movement, one had to manually wind the movement daily to top up the 40-hour power reserve. This movement has manual winding, but it also has the advantage of a rotor which is bidirectional, as you can see. And if you look closely at the two crown winding gears, you can see that the rotor spinning clockwise or anti-clockwise has the same effect. It drives the winding gears to wind the movement. So it doesn't matter when wearing the watch which direction the rotor rotates in, it has the same winding effect, topping up the 40-hour power reserve to its maximum. Now, this is a very reliable, well-proven workhorse movement. Vostok used the caliber 2209 18 dual manual wind movement from 1965 through till the 1980s, and then in the 1980s they upgraded the 2209 to this caliber 2415, which is their automatic movement. And this was a better upgrade, 31 joules rather than 18, still had a 10-year service interval, and the accuracy was relatively close to the 2209. Not particularly accurate, but I would simply describe this movement as being indestructible. Although it has a 10-year recommended service interval, in reality these movements are quite often run for 20 or 30 years plus, with no maintenance whatsoever, no lubrication. The movement parts are not broken down and ultrasonically cleaned and then lubricated with fresh lubricant, but they still continue to run for 20 to 30 years plus. So not a very accurate movement, but incredibly tough and durable. Now I've regulated this one to -4 seconds per day. Very easy movement to regulate, as you can see looking at the regulator. Now as you can see, the mark of the regulator shows it's been retarded, and I've managed to get this consistently to -4 seconds per day, which is perfectly acceptable for a caliber 2415, and it's actually within COSC chronometer limits of -4 to +6 seconds per day. Now, bear in mind that when I regulated this, it was fully wound to a maximum 40 hours of its power reserve, and it's a given that when watch movements, such as this caliber 2415, are fully wound, they run at their best performance, the most accurate performance, when the mainspring has its maximum power reserve. The problem is when automatic movements, the mainspring exhausts when it depletes its power reserve and loses tension. Often the accuracy is then lost, the calibration runs out, so this will probably run at -10 to -15 seconds per day when it loses power, but at the moment when fully wound it's running consistently at -4 seconds per day, which I'm very satisfied with. It really is the luck of the draw if one gets an accurate one or an inaccurate one. They can run -20 to +40 seconds per day, typically similar to a Seiko NH35A. Now with regards to the movement, it's a low beat movement. It runs at 19,800 vibrations per hour. Now to put that into perspective, a popular movement, for example, is the Seiko NH35A, which I'm sure you're familiar with, used in the Pagani design PD1661. That runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 3 Hz. Now the disadvantage of low beat movements like that is one gets a juddering second hand. It doesn't sweep around the dial smoothly like a 4 Hz movement running at 28,800 vibrations per hour, a higher beat rate. I like the 19,800 vibrations per hour of this movement because although it does have a juddering second hand, it means there's not a lot of stress, there's not a lot of load on the moving parts in the movement, because the low beat movement means that there's less wear and tear on it. When one runs a high beat movement at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz, it means there's more stress, there's more load, there's more wear and tear on the movement parts. It accelerates the wear. So that's why this has a 10-year service interval rather than 5 years, which is the usual normal for an automatic movement. The low beat movement has a longer service interval. So it's inaccurate. It doesn't have hacking, which is a disadvantage. So that brings me on to how to remove the winding stem from the movement. Normally when removing a crown and winding stem from a movement, one unscrews the crown and pulls out the winding stem to the crown setting position, the time setting position, and that hacks the movement. It stops the second hand dead to set the time precisely to the second. Now unfortunately this movement does not hack, so one cannot stop the balance wheel running. As you can see, it's running at the moment. So what one has to do is simply wait until the 40-hour power reserve is exhausted, the mainspring has fully unwound and the movement stopped dead. At that point it's safe to withdraw the crown winding stem from the movement, because it means that there's going to be no damage to the keyless works. So I wait until the movement stops, and then what I do is I unscrew the crown, and I'll show you where you put in the 1mm pin tool. Just bear with me and I'll get the camera to focus. So that button there, where I'm pressing the 1mm pin now, is the locking mechanism for the crown winding stem. The locking mechanism is spring loaded, so one simply presses down the button with the 1mm tool I'm using at the moment, and that presses down a spring which releases a tooth from the groove in the winding stem and allows the crown winding stem to come out of the movement. So one unscrews the crown from the crown tube, pulls out the winding stem to the crown to the time setting position, presses down this button on the crown lock, on the winding stem lock, and that allows you to withdraw the winding stem from the movement. Now if you don't disturb the keyless works, the alignment, you can simply push back in the new crown winding stem to the movement, and it will engage in the keyless works without any problem. And you press down the locking mechanism button with the pin, that allows it in, then you release it and it engages the tooth into the groove in the winding stem, and that will lock it in. And you can test that it's engaged properly then by screwing down the crown, and you'll hear a loud click, and that tells you that the tooth has engaged in the crown winding stem. And then what you do is you can unscrew the crown like so, and you can then try to manually wind it, and you'll know it's engaged properly because you'll see this winding gear rotating round. So just bear with me and I'll pull it out, and I'll try to demonstrate that for you on camera, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, it's difficult to do it because it's in the tool, but there we are. Right, so just bear with me and I'll get the camera to focus. There we are. So when you've got it in the right position, just bear with me, I'll try and do it on camera. No, I'll have to remove it from the tool holder. Just bear with me, I'll do that. I want to show you how you test it's in the right position. Right, so you pull out the crown to the setting position. That's now in the right position to set the hands on for setting the time. If you just push it back in and pull it out slightly, you get to the position for manually winding. So just bear with me and I'll find it. There we are. So now it's in their manual wind position. So you push the winding stem into the movement fully to engage the winding stem mechanism to lock, and then you pull it back out to the time setting position. You feel the click, and that means the hands are moving around the dial. You push it back in again, and as you can see, it's now functioning correctly because the keyless works are engaged in the winding stem. And as you can see, the winding gear is now rotating when I rotate the crown on the winding stem. And if I pull it out fully, it disengages the crown. As you can see, it's now moving the hands around the dial rather than moving the keyless works. So that's how you do it. Now you then screw the crown back down fully to provide the hermetic seal, and as you can see, if we move the rotor out of the way, it's now running and it's winding as it should do. So that's how you fit it. Now I'll just show you something else that I really like about this movement. I'll just put the gasket back into the right position, just bear with me. It's easy to do with the tweezers actually, but I'm doing it with this toothpick. There we are. Right, there's something else I like about this movement. If you look closely at the rotor, if you look at the center, there's a ball bearing race. Now there's 5 ball bearings in a pentagon formation, and it was actually Turner created the use of 5 ball bearings in that pentagon formation. In the 1960s, Turner made a movement for the Turner-matic watch, and that was the pioneer of the use of the 5 ball bearings, and that became the Turner watch brand emblem. They have 5 silver balls as the Turner brand logo, the emblem of the brand, and that comes from the use of 5 ball bearings in a pentagon formation. I really like that because it perfectly balances the rotor on those 5 ball bearings, and it allows for gaps between the 5 ball bearings in that pentagon formation for lubrication. So one can easily lubricate in between the 5 ball bearings, and therefore that will coat the 5 ball bearings in that race with lubricants, and that means that the rotor can spin round for 10 years before it needs a service. It's a very effective design, the Turner-matic pentagon formation of the 5 ball bearings. So I just thought I'd show that to you. So as you can see, there is a gasket which is flat rather than using a rubber O-ring, which I'm just seating now into position, and I'll just show you how the case back fits into the case. There are 2 slots, one at 12 o'clock, one at 6, which provides a key for the case back to fit into the watch case. I've actually put it upside down. Just bear with me, I'll rotate it through 180 degrees. That's the way it goes, like so. And then one puts the stainless steel ring around, and just one screws it down. Just bear with me and I'll do that. And this is a very good effective hermetic seal. It's a very good way of screwing down the case back to the case. So you can simply use your index finger and thumb to screw down the case back. Just bear with me, I'll zoom out and you'll get a better look at it. Before using the case back tool, you can tighten it down with your fingertips, like so. And that provides an effective hermetic seal. It compresses the stainless steel case back down to the tonneau case and seals the case back to the rubber gasket to the case. Very effective hermetic seal. So lastly, I'll just show you that the crown operates as it should do. One can unscrew the crown, it wobbles on the stem, pull it out to the time setting position. As you can see, the hands rotate as they should do to set the time, and one can also push it back into the manual winding position like so, and top up the power reserve by manually winding it to its maximum 40 hours. Finally, one can push it in, screw it down to provide an effective hermetic seal, and that's how the crown looks on the watch when it's fully screwed in. So slightly lower profile to the standard crown. So I'm absolutely delighted with it. Now all that remains is I'm going to screw down the case back tightly with the case back tool to make it watertight again, and then I've just got to rejoin the bracelet back together with a 1.6mm screw pin. So I hope you've liked my discussion of my SE crown upgrade and also the tips I've given you about how to remove the crown and refit it and talk you through the tools I use. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.